With the Super Bowl officially in the rearview mirror, it's time to focus on Kellen Moore and whether or not he can be the coach that fixed the New Orleans Saints. We'll talk about that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Rosevoglu, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott Vicknair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott Vicknair handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. The 2024 NFL season is in the books. The Eagles beat the crap out of the Chiefs last night in the Superdome, and it was an interesting scenario for Kellen Moore, who got to coach the Eagles offense, obviously as their offensive coordinator, and that very well in that building where they won last night and his offense was humming from start to finish could be his new home because he's expected to be the head coach of the Saints, and he's obviously been their prime target for pretty much the last 2 weeks. It's become very apparent that he's their guy. So Kellen Moore, he's becoming the head coach of the Saints. I know there's a lot of fans worried about that and whether or not he'll go back to Philly, and I know that Nick Sirianni said, hey, let's run it back. Of course he wants to run it back. Why would you not want to have your staff that just played a huge part in you making it to the Super Bowl and winning the whole damn thing? So Sirianni's just saying what he obviously has to say, but the main takeaway was Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie after the game was asked if he expects to lose Kellen Moore, and he said, and I quote, "I do. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wish him the very best with New Orleans. Very smart coach who has been able to adapt our offense week to week as needed to win games." So when the owner's saying, hey, he's probably gone, don't worry about it. I think Kellen Moore will become the next head coach of the Saints, and the focus really becomes on what he can do with New Orleans, and we'll talk about that in just a brief moment. Before I do that, just want to advise you guys, if you have any comments that you want to share regarding the Saints, Kellen Moore, whatever, be anything Saints related, put it in the chat below, and we'll get your comments up in just a little bit. And as always, if you enjoy our content here at Buku Media, please like the video and hit that subscribe button. We really, really would greatly appreciate your support. So let's talk about Kellen Moore and what he did in the Super Bowl, because I think there were certain aspects of his play calling that if you're a Saints fan, and you probably are if you're listening, you had to be amped up. And I think here's one thing that really stood out. I know the Eagles have better playmakers than the Saints. That's not really up for debate. The offense is loaded with talent. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Saquon Barkley, Dallas Goedert. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is way better at quarterback than anything the Saints have on the roster at the moment. And that O-line is just a wrecking crew. But the Chiefs really put an emphasis, and the only thing they probably did well yesterday was slowing down Saquon Barkley in the run game. It was very apparent from the jump that Steve Spagnuolo's defense said, hey, we are not going to let Saquon Barkley beat us. Now, everything else beat the Chiefs yesterday. That was very clear. But one thing I loved about Kellen Moore's play calling, particularly in the start of the second half, even though he knew Saquon was getting bottled up in the run game, I love that they didn't abandon it, nor did they have to because they were winning. But the second thing, and the one that stood out, is even if you have a running back who is off to a slow start in the ground game, you can get them involved other ways. And he did that. A couple early swing passes to Saquon Barkley. And yeah, rushing-wise, worst game of the season for Saquon Barkley, but he also had 6 catches for 40 yards. There's ways to get your playmaker involved even when the opposing defense is finding ways to kind of stifle their production. And I felt for the last couple of years with Alvin Kamara, if he's not running the football well, is he being used creatively in the pass game? And I feel like he isn't. And I think as great as Saquon Barkley is, and Saquon had one of the best running back seasons we'll ever see, Alvin as a receiver obviously is better than Saquon. Saquon as a runner, 10 times better than Alvin. There's no question about it. But Alvin as a receiver, in my opinion, just a way more effortless catcher and just route runner than Saquon. I think that has to excite you as a Saints fan, that even if there's moments where this run game is not going to be working, you know that Kellen Moore is going to be finding ways to prioritize Alvin, getting him the football in ways that are going to hurt the offense. We saw that with Saquon. But the play call that stood out to me, that reminded me of Sean Payton, was third quarter, Chiefs have a turnover on downs. Eagles have the ball just cross midfield. First play, they call play action shot, 46-yard touchdown pass to Devontae Smith, and all of a sudden it was 27-0. You just crack this thing open to 34-0 because you dial up a shot play after a turnover on downs, by midfield. That is something that Sean Payton always used to do. And the fact that some coaches, most coaches, are probably going to sit there and go, let's just hand the ball off 3 times. We're up 27. Let's start chewing up some clock. And Kellen Moore is saying, no, we're going for the fucking death blow. I love that. I absolutely love that. That was a play call to me. Kellen Moore didn't have to win me over, right? I was very excited about him for the last couple of weeks, just seeing how the Eagles offense week to week has adapted in the playoffs under his command. But that play call, when you call a shot play after the turnover on downs, when you're already up 27 points in the goddamn Super Bowl, yeah, that pumps me up because I want to see, especially with the playmakers the Saints have, that creativity, that aggressiveness, and I think Kellen Moore is going to bring that to the table. Whether or not he'll be a good head coach, only time will tell, right? Because he has to be a good leader of men, and that one we can't answer. But from a play calling perspective, what he was able to do the last 2 playoff games, Philly's best offensive production came in the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. So when the lights got bright, Kellen Moore got brighter. And I think what he was able to do these last 2 weeks is a testament to his play calling. His offense was prepared for Steve Spagnuolo's blitzes, which you can't say for a lot of teams. I mean, the Bills literally lost the AFC Championship game because they weren't prepared for Spags and what he's able to bring from a pressure standpoint. So, I mean, he checked off every freaking box yesterday. Shout out to Kellen Moore. And by the way, when you are in these coaching interviews, I can't imagine how difficult it is to juggle your actual job with other things going on at that time, especially for Kellen Moore with everything. That man was not distracted one bit. He may have interviewed twice with the Saints already and scheduled a 3rd meeting with them that's going to take place this week. He didn't look distracted at all. He looked laser focused, and I thought Kellen Moore was really one of the standouts. Just from a play calling perspective, everything worked for the Eagles yesterday, and kudos to him and just making sure he says, which he's talked about before, every player has superpowers. It's his job to get the best out of them. I mean, every single player on the Eagles yesterday looked superhuman. So shout out to Kellen Moore, future head coach of the Saints, it seems like, and I am just very, very excited for what he can bring from a schematic standpoint. That said, Kellen Moore is going to be the Saints head coach, and he will be. I think it is imperative that they figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. Because for New Orleans, it's not the easiest decision from a financial perspective. If anything, the easy thing financially would be to keep Derek Carr because you don't have to worry about, taking on the dead cap and finding other ways to become cap compliant. Because if you get rid of Derek Carr, you're not exactly getting cap space relief there, Whereas if you start moving around certain numbers, you keep number 4 on the roster, all right, things are a little bit easier. But the Saints, in my opinion, under no circumstance, should be starting Derek Carr next year. And it's not trying to be a Derek Carr hater. I think if Derek Carr gets released by the Saints, he'll have a new home and he'll start next year all 17 games if he's healthy for a team. I really do. I don't think Derek Carr is this god-awful quarterback. And I've really stood on that. He's not a bad quarterback, but he's not the quarterback that the Saints need to be playing right now. He doesn't fit the timeline. And frankly, after watching what Kellen Moore did this season with Jalen Hurts, he doesn't fit the system. And I think that for New Orleans, if Kellen Moore comes in and there's a quarterback he likes, whether it's a bridge option in free agency or a guy in the draft, I think you owe it to him to get him that guy and let them together for the next couple of seasons try to develop and build something in New Orleans, as opposed to playing Derek Carr, who will play decent football, maybe win you 1 or 2 more games that you don't need to win that end up being irrelevant because it's not helping the actual foundation of your team. And on top of it, he's not from a price perspective, he doesn't fit this team at all. There's no point having a $40 million quarterback when your team is clearly a bottom 10 team in the league. I just don't think it makes sense at the moment for New Orleans. So, again, not a knock on Derek Carr, but I think it is time for them to move on. We just saw yesterday the Jets are moving on from Aaron Rodgers, who there's other reasons with it. There's a lot of freaking baggage that comes with Rodgers, but that is a decision for them financially that they're going to eat a lot of dead money. So if the Jets can eat dead money with Aaron Rodgers and the Broncos can eat $80 million in dead money with Russell Wilson, the Saints can move on from Derek Carr. But I do think, and I'm going to hold firm to this opinion, the Derek Carr decision should really come down to whether or not Kellen Moore, A, wants him to start, and B, thinks he should be on the roster. Because the Saints have too many, I'm going to say smart because I got to give them credit. It's not easy running a football team. But you got too many football brains up top to not account for what your cap can look like with and without Derek Carr. Because the Saints haven't done the financial numbers yet, and they haven't run the numbers to see what it'll look like on the books with or without Derek Carr from now, then they're screwed. And by the way, I don't think that's the case. I think they know what they want to do, and they have all the moves lined up. If you keep Carr, this is what they're doing. If you don't keep Carr, these are the moves you have to make to be cap compliant. I think the Saints have worked all that out. Organizations, even when they struggle like New Orleans, they're not just flat out as stupid as you may think. They're getting their homework done. But I don't think those should be the ones making the decision. I think the head coach who's going to be running the system, who just proved that he can shine with different quarterbacks. We've seen him have, success with Dak and now with Jalen Hurts. Is Derek Carr going to be that quarterback that fits that system? I just don't think so. So I believe they're heading towards a quarterback change. Nothing's been confirmed yet. NFL Network's reported that the Saints are going to take the next few weeks to decide what happens with Derek Carr. But remember, I believe it's the third day of the new league year. You start owing him a little bit more guaranteed money. I don't know if New Orleans wants to do that. So I think they're going to move on from Derek Carr, and this isn't me reporting anything. This is merely me speculating and where I believe this is heading. And I just think it just makes the most sense for the Saints. I just don't know how or why you would stick with Derek Carr and ride this out for another year unless you really say, hey, financially it's whatever. But even then, I wouldn't start him. I'd keep him on the bench for $40 million. I just don't understand why you would. So we'll see what happens with Derek Carr, but I do believe the Saints are probably heading towards a change at the quarterback spot. Another change you're going to have to make, obviously, is the entire coaching staff because Kellen Moore is going to bring his guys in. And I think there's one coach who is trending towards becoming on the Saints staff, and I can't say for certain if I like it. I'm just kind of indifferent about it. And that is Brandon Staley. The Saints have not yet hired Kellen Moore, so because of that, you don't know who's going to be on this staff. But I do believe that Brandon Staley is going to be the defensive coordinator for the Saints. Remember, Kellen Moore was the offensive coordinator for Brandon Staley when Brandon Staley was the head coach of the Chargers. Now that Kellen Moore is on track to be the head coach of the Saints, Staley doesn't have a job at the moment, just got let go from the Niners, and he wasn't doing really much with them anyway. He was kind of just like in an assistant/analyst role this past season. I believe the opportunity to be a defensive coordinator again in the NFL is going to be too good for Staley to pass up. He doesn't have options, can't be picky. I think he'll be coaching the Saints. And Staley's resume is so fascinating because he's got 1 year as a defensive coordinator for the Rams with prime Aaron Donald and a really, really stacked cast. And the Rams defense was excellent. They were number one in the league with Brandon Staley. But how much was that the talent? I'm not sure, because when Brandon Staley goes to the Chargers and the Chargers defense stinks pretty much his entire tenure, I don't know what to make. Because the one thing that really grinds my gears is when a head coach's side of the football isn't good. And I think that was for the majority of Brandon Staley's tenure in LA with the Chargers. That was the case. And yet, the 1 year he was a defensive coordinator, granted, a lot of talent, they were number one. So it's a very tricky evaluation to make because I think Staley could be a good defensive coordinator. I know he's not a good head coach. We've seen it. And I think there's some questionable things he does. But at this point, so many coaches have been hired. You're picking last when it comes to head coach. The options are kind of, minimal. The options aren't great. You got minimal options on the market. I think Staley ends up becoming the defensive coordinator. Now, it could end up being a good move, right? We'll see what happens. The season would have to play out. We'd have to see how Staley coaches up some of the young talent on the Saints defense. But that's where I'm at with Brandon Staley, where I know as a defensive coordinator with a stacked roster, the man can produce. But I've seen him struggle with the Chargers, and I've seen them struggle to really build anything that really resembles an up-and-coming dominant defense. And he struggled with the Chargers mightily in that regard. And the Chargers had talent. It's not like the Chargers didn't have talent on that side of the ball. So I'm kind of indifferent on Brandon Staley becoming the defensive coordinator. I don't hate it. I don't love it per se. But I also know there's not a lot of options. And I know that Brandon Staley has been a good defensive coordinator before. And I think that for New Orleans, it's worth taking the gamble here. And if it doesn't work out, all right, Kellen Moore's going to have to adjust and find a new play caller for the defense. But I think that's where we're heading. Again, nothing's been finalized, but Brandon Staley, there's too many whispers, whether it's from ESPN, whether it's from NFL Network, too many whispers right now. He will be, in my opinion, defensive coordinator for the Saints, and we're just going to have to hope it works. And I think it's going to be tough because you're going to have patience. I don't think there's a very talented defense. I think some players on this defense have potential, Brian Brzee being one, Kool-Aid McKinstry being another. I still think Alontae Taylor in the slot could be a good player, but you guys know how I feel about him when he's an outside corner. I don't think he's very good, but I just don't know. It's going to be one of those really, really tough evaluations to make, but I see the connection, and I think Brandon Staley, all things considered, Saints can probably do worse from a defensive coordinator spot. So with all that said, I'm going to get into any comments that you guys have. So make sure you guys leave them in the chat below, and we'll continue with that. Before I do that, though, I want to get a quick word from Scott Vicknair.
And Jonathan Williams brings it all the way back from the 20-yard line.
What a terrific way to end the first half.
And tonight's game is brought to you by Scott Vicknair Injury Attorneys. They always fight for the win.
You mean attorney? It's one lawyer, Scott Vicknair.
No, there's two.
Brad Scott and David Vicknair.
Well, it's confusing.
That it is. They could have picked a better name.
Scott Vicknair Injury Attorneys, we fight for the win.
Once again, thank you to Scott Vicknair for being part of the program. So let's keep it rolling through. Got through my 15 minutes of rambling. I appreciate you guys sticking around through. Let's get into our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. We're going to start off with a super chat from Justin Cash. Thank you so much for the support. Justin says, bring me Mason Graham. Please trade up. Look, I think when you watch the Eagles and what they did yesterday, dominating in the trenches, didn't even blitz once. Yeah, of course, you'd love to see a guy like Mason Graham, put him next to Brian Brzee, and all of a sudden you're having building blocks on the defensive line, which is something they need. So I'll tell you this. When it comes to this draft, and maybe this is the easy cop-out answer for me, you can convince me about like 10 different prospects at that number 9 spot. You really can, because the Saints have a lot of openings. They have a lot of openings that they need to take care of. If you tell me Mason Graham, I'd be pumped. If you tell me that you want them to go, let's say, who else would be bringing? Ashton Genty, I'm not against, but I do think the Saints can probably get running back talent later on in the draft, so I don't know if I would love that. But you could still convince me on Ashton Genty. McMillan, obviously, you can convince me on for sure. I think Saints fans will get pissed about Will Campbell, but I never say no to O-line. But either way, that'll be one. The guy that I've vouched for pretty heavily right now has been Will Johnson from Michigan. I think Will Johnson would really stabilize the Saints secondary. So you convinced me on a lot of picks, but Mason Graham, absolutely. I think he'd be an awesome addition to this Saints team. Pelicans Noah says, what's up, family? Who dat? Let's go Saints. Jerry G says, morning. One crazy who dat says, got to give the man time to install the players he needs to succeed in his system and get the staff he needs as well. I agree. Look, you're going to have patience with Kellen Moore. He's going to be a first-year head coach in his 30s. Got to be patient. But this is what we rather have, in my opinion, as Saints fans. We rather have the hope of developing and finding a coach who, for the next decade plus, can be the guy. And I, more than most people, think Mike McCarthy's a good coach. And if the Saints hired Mike McCarthy a couple weeks ago, I wouldn't have been mad about it. But Mike McCarthy, there's a cap to where the Saints can be for a roster that's not built to win now. The timelines don't make sense. Just like I said, the timelines don't make sense for Derek Carr. The timeline wouldn't have made sense for that. We're going to have to be patient with Kellen Moore, but I think it's worth the Saints swinging for the fences here. So I'm kind of excited. Pelicans also says Kellen Moore and Kirby Moore OC from Missouri. Awesome. Let's go Saints. Chase says, did Kellen Moore get hired? Not officially yet, but it'll happen. It'll happen. Jay Hoodie says, Moore is my coach. Moore's my type of coach. Got a super chat here from Praise YHWH. Thank you so much for the support. Really, really appreciate it. Keep it rolling here. We got Xavier saying, I hope Moore drops Carr, drafts Genty, and we move. I think that's going to be the move where if he does cut Carr or suggests that they cut Carr, obviously he's not going to be the one making the actual roster move. Saints fans will probably give him an extra year of grace just because so many of them are ready for this Derek Carr experiment to go just past the wayside. And I get it. I totally get it. Will he make that move? I don't know. We'll see. I'm kind of leaning towards, I think the Saints are going to move on from Derek Carr, but we'll see what happens. Mad Rummer says, morning, Who Dat Nation waiting to welcome him in. Rachel says they asked him to run it back. Is he going to come to the Saints? Yes. Here's the thing, guys. Obviously, if you're Kellen Moore, the Eagles are going to try to court you and bring you back for another year because you just won the goddamn Super Bowl. And Kellen Moore's offense in the biggest games of the season was lights out good. Obviously, you're going to want him back. And Nick Sirianni, who doesn't call offensive plays for the Eagles and is trying to make sure he's got the best possible staff, of course he wants to keep his guys around because the longer Kellen Moore stays around and the longer Vic Fangio stays around, the better chance of the Eagles having success. There's no doubt about it. But for Kellen Moore, when you look around the league, it could change in an instant. And what happens if next year he sticks with the Eagles and Saquon gets banged up early because he's playing such a physical position and Hurts struggles a little bit at the gate, and the Eagles, who are coming off a Super Bowl appearance, all of a sudden come out of the gates and they're like 3-4 to start the season. Your stock's not looking as hot, and the NFL will change their opinion on you in a hurry. So Kellen Moore's stock will never be higher than it is today. And I believe the one thing, and I'm not saying this is making this fixes the Saints, right? The Saints got a lot of problems structurally, but the Saints are patient with coaches, and that does matter because Kellen Moore right now would be walking into a mess, but he'd be walking into a mess knowing he's not getting fired after the first season. He's probably not getting fired after the second season, and that patience could buy him the time he needs to build a roster in his vision and maybe getting this thing to work. So I get it. It makes all the sense to say, hey, let's run this shit back if you're Nick Sirianni. You should want to run it back. But Kellen Moore, who just won a Super Bowl, I think them winning increases the odds of him leaving. When you lose, sometimes you have that Ben Johnson moment where it's like, hey, I really want to win with these guys. And you come back for another year and you turn down a job. Not the case. You just won a Super Bowl, Philly. You're out of there if you're Kellen Moore. Chase says, when are we going to hire Kellen Moore? I think sometime this week will get announced. I think sometime this week for sure. Jack says that touchdown to Devontae Smith put them up 34-0 was bold, but a great decision. Yeah, I loved it. That's the type of play call you want. You want someone to be super, super aggressive and really, really go after it. And I think he did that. So we'll see. We'll see if he can bring that aggressive mindset to New Orleans. I think he can. Jerry G says Chiefs fans are so sick right now. Yeah, that's for sure. That was one of the worst Super Bowl performances I've ever seen by a team, honestly. And it's top to bottom, right? Like O-line didn't protect. Mahomes panicked, looked flustered. Receivers weren't getting open. Just structurally terrible. Praise YHWH says draft Jalen Milroe. He can be our Five Below / Dollar Tree Jalen Hurts. I'm sure that will be a popular thing. Look, if Kellen Moore believes he can make it work with Jalen Milroe, you guys know how I feel. I'm always of the opinion of, A, these guys know way more than me, obviously. But B, you should always try to get the players who the coach believes will really thrive and maximize the potential of their system. And if that ends up being Milroe, so be it. Milroe's fascinating because there'll be a sequence where I'm like, damn, this kid's freaking good. And there'll be a sequence the next one where I go like, I don't think he's going to be an NFL player. It's finding that consistency. And the one thing I'll say about Jalen Hurts, because I do think Milroe's a better athlete, Jalen Hurts, for better or worse, was always steady in college. Steady at Oklahoma. For the most part, steady at Alabama. And Milroe, the highs are higher in my opinion, but the lows are so much lower. So trying to find that middle ground. But I could see them considering, and I wouldn't rule that out. Ashton Genty at 9, trade up from 40 to get Jalen Milroe. We have our dollar store, Hurts, and Barkley. Jack says it's rare to see Mahomes struggle like that. Yeah, Mahomes was probably the worst we'll probably see him play in a long time. Probably a long time, man. Cody says, I know a lot of people think Kellen Moore will bring Doug Nussmeier in, but I hope he brings the O-line coach with him. Promote him to OC if you have to. I would love that, but I think the OC, the O-line coach for the Eagles, last time I checked, let me pull it up. I think he's been there for a long time. I don't think Jeff Stoutland's going to leave. Let me pull it up, see where he's been. He's been with the Eagles since 2013. So, I don't know. I don't think he'll leave, but I'm sure if you're Kellen Moore, you'd love to bring him aboard, right? So you could kind of have like a smoother transition for your run game to thrive in New Orleans. Nick says we need to build a dominant O-line for 2025, and the 2026 draft is when we get our future quarterback. I am not opposed to that. Definitely not opposed to that. Jack says Abdul Carter would be the dream selection for sure. He'll be out before the top 3 ends, though. DJ says, hard to not be excited about Kellen. This is his time to put us back on the map. Need another offensive-minded head coach in the building. I agree, DJ. Us Saints fans have kind of been through the ringer the last couple of months. I think this is the first time in a while that I'm pretty excited about this team. Margaret says the Saints do not have the talent of the Eagles. The D and the O-line are terrible. This team is old, and if you think Moore is going to be the magic pill, it's not. Need to get rid of Loomis. Well, look, it all kind of goes hand in hand, right? Saints got to start drafting well. You look at that Eagles team. Yeah, they got a lot of high-priced guys. You signed Saquon. You traded for A.J. Brown, but you drafted Devontae Smith. You drafted Cooper DeJean. You drafted Quinyon Mitchell. You drafted Jalen Carter. Got to make some savvy signings. Zach Baldwin, former Saint. You signed him to a 1-year deal. He's been excellent. Mekhi Becton, former offensive tackle for the Jets. You played him at guard after signing him to a short-term deal. He was excellent. So I don't know, man. I understand the frustration with the GM aspect. I'll never, push against that from you guys. Mickey Loomis has not done his job. I do believe Kellen Moore can raise the floor of this team and the ceiling of this team. But yeah, no doubt about it. He's going to need better players in there. Mad Rummer says, use Rattler, sign Fields, let Carr ride. I might be in the minority on this one, guys, but I don't really care if they sign Justin Fields or not. I think the moment for Justin Fields is come and gone. And also, I think Pittsburgh's going to keep him anyway. You can sell me on if Moore likes Rattler. Let's see how Rattler does for a year. You can absolutely sell me on that. I don't love the idea of cutting Carr and then spending $10 million on Justin Fields and then playing Field. I just don't know if it's going to work. But maybe I'm wrong. And if Justin Fields comes to New Orleans and thrives, obviously I'd be a huge fan of the dude. But I feel like it's very, very tough to get excited about that prospect because financially, I just don't think it's going to make sense for the team. I just don't. Let's see what else we got here. Jerry says, move on from that broken down Carr. Pelicans Nola says, Kellen Moore already told you he's not impressed with the Saints quarterback room. Yeah, I think that's like the telltale sign about Derek Carr, right? When that report comes out that, he doesn't like the quarterback room or it's giving him hesitation, tells you all you need to know. Jack says, Chris, how would you react to the Saints signed Aaron Rodgers? I mean, I wouldn't love it. And the reason I wouldn't love it is culture-wise. I don't like the idea of a coach in his mid-30s bringing a quarterback who's like older than him into the building and trying to get the respect of everyone. When Rodgers, as great as Aaron Rodgers is as a talent, first ballot Hall of Famer, 4-time MVP, the freaking guy is damn good. And I still think he's a good quarterback. I know he's towards the end of his career, but I still think he's a fine quarterback. I just don't think he would make sense for this team. I just don't. Justin Cash with the super chat. Thank you so much for the support. Says Kellen Moore needs to bring Becton with him. Would not be opposed to that at all. Because let me tell you something. This Saints team needs to get better at guard. I'd love if they brought Becton with them. But the price went up for Becton. The price definitely went up. So we'll see how much he ends up costing. But the price definitely went up for Mekhi Becton. Cody says at this point, anybody he hires is pretty much a one-year rental to see how it works now that everybody pretty much has their staff finalized. I think that's very fair. I think that's very, very fair. Mad Rummer says Staley wasn't a bad DC, though. No, he was a great DC for that 1 year. Great DC. That's what makes it complicated. He had an awesome year as a defensive coordinator, and then he coached the Chargers for, 3 seasons, and his defense wasn't good. That's where it's complicated. But as a defensive coordinator for 1 season with that stacked Rams roster, they were number 1 in the league. So it's just a weird evaluation to make. Danny T04 says, Carr is gone. I believe he will be gone, for sure. I believe it. Danny T04 says Sean got his quarterback, DA got his quarterback, and now Moore will have a chance to trade or draft his quarterback. Yeah, I think that's the right way to do it, Bio Boys 504 says, let's shore up the O-line and D-line through draft and free agency and run it back with our weapons healthy. It's funny because for the Saints, there's so much talk about what doesn't work and why this team is going to struggle, and they'll probably struggle a good bit next season for sure. Maybe I'm being delusional. I feel like if they can get this O-line clicking, you can get by, at least for 1 season, with Olave, Shaheed, and Alvin being like your 3 main pieces offensively. I really think you can get by and make the offense somewhat fun to watch. Now, I would like them to add a tight end because I think the middle of the field needs to get better. I would like them to add another receiver. I'd add another running back, whether that's through the draft or even adding a role player through free agency like a Kenneth Gainwell who knows Kellen Moore's system. Wouldn't be opposed to that either. But maybe it's delusional of me. I feel like Olave, Shaheed, and Alvin can play well in Kellen Moore's offense. As long as you get the O-line working, I feel like they'll be able to have some success next season. Derek Ansley is the best DC candidate, You can thank me later. Is he an option, though? Is he an option? I think he crossed paths, right, with Kellen Moore. So it is possible, but I'm not sure if I saw him as an option yet. But he did cross paths him, I believe, in LA. So I'm not opposed to anything, guys. Look, the one thing I'll say when it comes to having a new regime, because I've been begging for the Saints to go this route, is I'm going to be patient with whoever they pick. And they will get patience from me, which is rich because I'm the guy who likes to complain a lot. But I will be patient. So if that's what they go with, I'll be cool with it. Let's keep it rolling here. Danny says, I say move on from all the old heads and get younger. If it was that easy, I think they would. If it was that easy, I think they would. Unfortunately, it isn't that easy because the way the contracts are structured, the Saints are just going to endlessly be on the hook for certain players. So, man, I think that's the frustrating part. But I agree. If they could, in a perfect world, cut these guys and get cap relief from it and get younger, got to do it, man. And that's for a lot of these old players. Tyron, Cam, DeMario, like, I would be ruthless when it came to that regard, but you can't with the way the roster's structured, and you're not going to get any relief from it. Pelicans Nola says Aaron Rodgers, a.k.a. Roy Rodgers, is too old to be a quarterback in New Orleans. Don't disagree with that. Chris, Ashton Genty at 9, trade up for Jalen Milroe at 40 to get that fifth-year option. You upset at that? No, I wouldn't be upset at that. First off, I think that would actually, whether or not it would work, only time would tell. But I think that would make the season far more intriguing than whatever it's going to look like right now, you know? So, no, I don't hate it. I just worry about Jalen Milroe. I just worry. I think there's so many inconsistencies with him. But if someone's going to make it work, it might be Kellen Moore. We'll see. Freddie says we have to spread patience to Who Dat Nation once he gets hired because it's going to take some time to be good again. I agree. Danny says, here we go with another Marcus Davenport and Peyton Turner type draft. I'm going to sleep. Jerry says, big shout out to Nola for Super Bowl week. I love this freaking city. I think New Orleans, you know, for whatever questions people may have about, like, maybe the stadium isn't as flashy as the new ones, right? Like Allegiant Stadium or SoFi Stadium. And it's not. But goddamn, New Orleans is such a good city. And I believe if you're having a Super Bowl rotation where once every 5 years, at least this city gets a chance to host the big game, New Orleans has to be in there because the whole buildup to Super Bowl should feel like a celebration. It's the culmination of a season. It's getting excited to watch the two teams representing their respective conferences go head-to-head in the big game. I don't think a lot of cities can match what New Orleans does. I don't know if anyone really can. So I thought they put a great representation of the city on display this week. And I don't think you'll find a single person who's going to complain about the way New Orleans hosted this year's Super Bowl. I thought it was a masterclass. Mad Rumor says, do you think our O-line will be better this year? I personally feel it will upgrade a lot, and I'd rather grab at 9. We need an edge or Genty or Princely at 40. Look, I think O-line, a lot of it's on Eric McCoy if he's healthy, right? Look at the way the O-line played when Eric McCoy was healthy first 2 games, and then everything else kind of fell apart. So there are some factors, but I do believe there's reason to believe that the O-line can get better. Let's go through them. Eric McCoy should be healthy. That's the first one. Let's throw that to the side. Fuaga entering year 2. You'd like to think he'll develop. He'll be better. He was good as a rookie. Should be sharper in his second year. I'd like to think that'll help the O-line for the Saints. So put that to the side. Trevor Penning, another year. There are concerns. I don't think he's obviously nowhere close to perfect, but he took a massive step from year 2 to year 3. Can he take a massive step from year 3 to year 4? And if he does that, you might have your center and then 2 really good offensive tackles. The guard spot is what concerns me because I don't like Suzy Ruiz one bit. And I don't think the Saints have an answer at left guard. So can you improve at the guard spot? I think it's possible because it's hard to get worse than what you currently have. So I think when you factor in all those 4 reasons, I do believe the O-line will be better. I do. Danny says, didn't Sean get his QB and DA got his QB? Why can't Moore get his? He will. He will. Respected Heart says, none of y'all wanted Moore. Y'all wanted Aaron Glenn. I've been calling for Kellen Moore. Y'all was all on Aaron Glenn. Look, and admittedly so, Aaron Glenn was someone I'd love to see, was someone I wanted to see coach the Saints. I think for New Orleans, and this goes for every team that's hired a first-year head coach, you're pretty much kind of throwing a dart at the board and hoping it sticks. And I think the one thing about Aaron Glenn and the thing that the Saints have needed is kind of like that culture reset of having the strong leader in the room, which is why I really, really wanted to see Aaron Glenn be the coach. That said, when Aaron Glenn comes off the board, and it was your Kellen Moores, your Mike McCarthy's, your Joe Brady's, I might have been on the minority of this one. Joe Brady scared the fuck out of me. I still think he's too young of a head coach, and I do believe that I get concerned when these coaches have like a Josh Allen at quarterback because it's so easy to get things rolling with Josh Allen, and then you go to a team and you don't have Josh Allen, and it's like, all right, I don't know what to do. Where I've seen Kellen Moore get Dak Prescott's best football for the most part. I've seen him now get Jalen Hurts and that offense clicking to the point where they just won a Super Bowl. So there's a little bit more cachet there, but I will absolutely own up to that. When the coaching cycle and hire process starts, Kellen Moore to me was not on that list of my top options. I liked Aaron Glenn, and then if they couldn't get Aaron Glenn, I was cool with Mike McCarthy. But Kellen Moore clearly, and I think it's pretty apparent now with the way this playoffs played out, he elevated his coaching as the season went on. And whether or not he becomes a good head coach, we'll see. But that has to stand for something. That has to stand for something for what he did. No doubt about it. Cherry says Loomis needs to step down and go home. Praise says, respect at heart. My brother, Trey Johnson from Twitter, wanted more for a month now. Y'all the only three I know. Look, I don't know if you guys follow Trey, but I think he predicted every single head coaching hire. I have to go check. But I'm pretty sure that he predicted every single one. I really do. Everyone knows Aaron Glenn is Dennis Allen. I disagree with that. This is where I disagree. I think Dennis Allen is a better play caller than Aaron Glenn. I think Aaron Glenn is a better leader of men than Dennis Allen. So I do think they vary there. The results might end up being the same, though. So we'll see in a year's time if, regardless of their different philosophies, if they're the same exact results-wise. But I do think DA is a better play caller than Aaron Glenn. I think Aaron Glenn's a better leader. I think that's where DA really, really struggled. I'm giving Moore 3 years tops if he gets rid of Carr. Isaiah says, I think Rat could become a Hurts-like player. I don't personally. It's not, to me, the only reason is I just don't know what that special trait's going to be for Rattler. And Jalen Hurts, there's two things that really go for him. A, he is that dual threat weapon that you could have a quarterback that Spencer's not. Doesn't mean Spencer's not mobile. Spencer is mobile, but Spencer's not Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, we saw it yesterday. And by the way, that's 2 Super Bowls now that he's done it. In both Super Bowls against the Chiefs, Jalen Hurts has had 70 rushing yards in each of those games. So his legs are a freaking weapon, man. That's one. And then 2, I think for Jalen Hurts, there is a level of maturity when it comes to him, not as a person. I think Spencer has really already done that. That maturation process for him has really happened already. And I think Spencer's a great dude. I think Hurts just, he's already got it, whether it was early on in his career to this point now. I think there is that ability to kind of just take what the defense is giving you. And Rattler can learn that. So it doesn't mean Rattler can't learn that. But I see Jalen Hurts as a goddamn weapon at times, especially in the run game. And I don't know if Rattler will be able to do that. So could Rattler become Hurts in terms of a good quarterback? Absolutely could become a good quarterback. I don't think he can become a Hurts-like player, though, the way Hurts is right now. Because I don't even think Jalen Hurts is elite, but Jalen is a gamer who, if he's healthy, those legs are going to kill you in certain spots, and that happened, whether you're talking about the NFC Championship game or in the Super Bowl for me. So I don't think Rattler's going to be that dude, but I've made it very clear if the Saints start Rattler for 2025, I'd be cool with it. I'd like to see what he is and what he isn't, and Saints get some clarity there. Jaden says Kellen Moore will be good for the Saints. I sure hope so. Respect at Heart says, I'd like to see Arch Manning and Moore's offense. If we play Derek Carr next year, that could be possible. If we start Rattler, we might win 8 games. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know if he can be that, if he could get them to 8 wins. I really don't know. I think the Saints team has a lot of holes. I'm not expecting 8 wins anyway. But truthfully, and maybe this is me being a pessimist, I think the Saints I'm probably looking at like 5-6 wins. And that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be awful. I'd like to see the Saints just show progress. I think so many lifeless games this past season. You can lose and still show progress. Kind of think about the Lions. What was it, like 4 years ago? First year with Dan Campbell. Like the results weren't great in terms of win-loss, but they were building. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. Isaiah says the O-line coach has no desire to come here. I agree. I don't think the Saints are getting their O-line coach. So not worried about that. Got JL, new member for Boo Crew Media. Really appreciate you coming on, JL. Thank you so much for the support. Hakeem says New Orleans showed the NFL how it's done, cleaned the city up. The vibe culture is unmatched. Shout out to my hometown. I think that what they did this past week was sick, man. Every single aspect was awesome. Also, shout out to Jameis Winston. He really brought the energy this week for Fox as like one of their correspondents. I thought he was pretty awesome. So just a really, really awesome time for Saints fans to kind of see this city on full display and hope to God they can get back to the Super Bowl within the next 10 years. I'd love to see, every time I watch a Super Bowl and I see the confetti fall, I wonder, like, are we going to get that moment as Saints fans again to kind of see our team go through it, you know? Cameron says Rat can definitely run when he needs to. I think that is underrated. The difference between him and Carr is very obvious. He can move, but he's not. Again, if the question is, can he be the next Jalen Hurts? I think the answer is a resounding no. That doesn't mean he can't be a good quarterback, though. We need to put a little bit more respect on Hurts as a runner in terms of how much of a weapon he is. Rattler has a better arm than Hurts. I don't think that's up for debate. Like, Rattler, even this past season, there were a couple throws he made that, like, I don't think a lot of good quarterbacks can make that throw, you know? Like, for example, a guy that I think is a good quarterback. I think Dak Prescott's a good quarterback. There are certain throws Rattler makes because of his ability to put zip on the ball where I'm like, you know, a guy like Dak's not making that throw, you know? But I think Hurts really, he elevates his game in big spots. I think it's very apparent now after seeing the last two Super Bowls. So David Nola 985 says, with such a young head coach, do you think it's more important for the team under him to be younger so older players don't undermine his authority? I think it would happen without older players trying. You know, I don't know. I think you can make an argument that, for me, having a DeMario, having a Cam Jordan, having an Alvin, in theory, it should be good to have those vets there, right? Because if someone's acting out of line, those guys have seen what it takes to be a winner. Those guys have seen what it takes to make a playoff run. They're not going to put up for that. And I think that would help Kellen more in terms of keeping the locker room in check. Maybe I'm naive. I really think it helps having those guys from a leadership standpoint. That said, I can understand the concern, but I don't know. I think guys like DeMario, guys like Cam, guys like that, those guys are professionals. Like, they don't fuck around. Their priority is to win football games. They don't really want to accept a losing, I don't want to say culture because they've accepted losing the last 3 years with Dennis Allen, but they know what is acceptable as a professional. And I think it's good to, look, they can't get off those guys anyway, but I think it's good to have veterans in the locker room when you have an older coach, when you have a younger coach like that. Jane says, do you think that Kellen Moore can get the Eagles O-line coach and the Eagles DC coach to come to Saints, yes or no? I mean, well, they're not getting defensive coordinator Vic Fangio, if that's your question. They're not. Vic's staying in Philly. There's no doubt about that. As for getting Jeff Stoutland, I don't think he's leaving the Eagles. So I'll go no on both, personally. Jay's Galaxy says, I'm hoping and praying we don't draft a quarterback this year. If it's a 5th-round pick, sure. Hot take. I'm like kind of over them just drafting day 3 quarterbacks at this point. So either take one because you like them early or don't take one at all and try to see if you can hit on late-round picks for other positions because the Saints have a lot of positional needs. Montauk says, can we move up with Tennessee and get Cam Ward? Is that possible, and how much would it take? All right, so you're picking 9 right now. I think that you're obviously trading next year's 1st-round pick minimum, probably trading 2nd-round pick this year. You're giving up a lot, man. I don't love that idea. It doesn't mean Cam Ward can't be good. Cam Ward's a very talented player, but I would not. And personally, I think Tennessee is going to trade the number 1 pick. I just don't think they're going to fall that far back. I think they might trade it to maybe the Giants at 3. This way the Giants can get the quarterback that they want with number 1, and the Titans still can get a premier prospect at 3 and get some extra draft capital. So that's what I think ends up happening. But I do believe that you could obviously swing a trade if you wanted to. I just think the Saints have so many needs. I don't know if they'll do that. David says, Jari Evans for O-line coach. Not opposed to that. I think Rattler is still a raw prospect. He's shown glimpses of potential. We'll see if Moore believes him or looks to the draft for his guy. Yeah, we'll get our answer. Again, I think for me, right now, I'm in the camp of I just don't want to see Derek Carr play quarterback for the Saints anymore. So whatever they end up doing, I'm cool with it as long as they just don't go back to Derek Carr. But they could start Rattler, but I think you got to just see how Kellen Moore evaluates this roster once he's officially hired, and we'll go from there. Jerry says, speaking of Jameis Winston, will he be back with the Saints? I love his energy. My guess is no. If I'm Jameis, I'm going to a team that is in that weird spot if they don't draft a quarterback. Like maybe the Giants might not be a bad spot. I think the Jets make a lot of sense for Jameis Winston. I'd probably go the Jets. I think that probably makes the most sense right now for them. Isaiah says Rat's ability to avoid the sack on play action is great with the right coach. He could elevate that. Possibly. Look, I don't want to sound like anti-Rattler because I understand when I push back on Saints fans trying to hype up Rattler, it feels like I'm coming across as anti-Rattler. I hope Rattler is the future for the Saints because then that means the Saints have a cheap quarterback who will help them, A, rebuild, and B, fix their cap situation, which is sick. Just disgusting right now. But I would prefer that. My hope is that they get a young quarterback like a Rattler who isn't expensive, and all of a sudden you're fixing this team on the fly. I just don't think we saw enough in the brief starts he had for me to get excited or be like, hey, they can fix this dude or he could be the future. I'm willing to give him a full season. I would be willing to give him a full season as a fan if he started all of 2025 to evaluate and see how he plays week to week without the pressure of feeling like, oh, Derek Carr's coming back from injury or he's going to replace me, whatever. I would be down for that. I'm just trying to pump the brakes a little bit in terms of what I think he could be, because I think the arm talent's there. That doesn't always equate to being a good quarterback. And I'm not comparing the two as quarterbacks because this is, because the guy I'm about to mention, in my opinion, is a bad quarterback already. But Will Levis has a shit ton of arm talent. But if you are not able to be mature and smart from the neck up, it's not going to matter. Now, I think that's where Rattler has the advantage over a guy like Will Levis. But that's why I'm just trying to pump the brakes just a tad. It doesn't mean I'm anti-Rattler. Just means I want to see how this all plays out. Isaiah says, do you think Alvin will get traded if he doesn't like Moore already going based off his tweet? No, I don't. I think Alvin's going to get in line. And, look, if you're Alvin, you have your preference because you've worked with Darren Rizzi and you know what type of leader he is, and I get that. But when the dust settles and this hire gets made and you look around and you see that, man, Kellen Moore just got the best season out of Saquon. Granted, Eagles O-line is stacked and Saquon is in a better position right now at this stage in his career than Alvin is. He should be excited. I think that negativity will switch over too. Montauk says, why are you open? We don't draft a quarterback now. We're going to have to draft one in the first round sooner or later. Look, if they draft one at 9 or whatever, and they like one, I'm cool with it. I'm always pro. If you love a quarterback prospect, you take the quarterback prospect. I just don't know if the way the Saints are currently constructed, if it is worth them trading up to number 1. That's where my pushback would be. Because if you trade to number 1, you are giving up almost all your good draft capital this year, all of your good draft capital next year, and you are basically going to have to fill out the rest of your roster with like vet minimum guys. And that's where my concern is. Now, someone brought up before, if the Saints draft someone at 9 and then trade up from 40 to get Jalen Milroe, would I be okay with it? If they liked Milroe and they feel like they could develop him, my answer would be yes, and I wouldn't think twice about it. So I'm not anti-drafting quarterback. I'm anti them using, 4th and 5th round picks on quarterbacks because you can get, you could get a role player in that spot. You can get a role player in that spot. We've seen other teams do that. And I am also anti-trading up number 1 in a class where, frankly, I don't love Shedeur Sanders as a prospect, and I don't know how good Cam Ward can be. I think Cam Ward has more potential than Shedeur, and I think Shedeur is more consistent than Cam, but I don't love either quarterback prospect to just mortgage the future. So I would stick at 9 and then work everything from there. Dr. Williams says, have the Saints hired more yet? No, not yet. Seems like Kellen knows how to get the most out of his players, unlike guys that system guys who stick a scheme. Not every player is made for every scheme. Kellen's versatile. I would say so. Different offenses that he's run the last couple of years. And even Philly, right? Philly started off throwing the football this year, and they kind of had that shift to going, all right, we're just going to run the fucking football because no one can stop us, but that's the best version of our team is when we're running the football. And they went full committed to it. That's the key thing. A lot of positional needs. Like if we could shoot in the dark and get Kyle McCord, we need T-Mac or Tyler Warren in the top 10. Tired of seeing Mikael Williams projected to us. Yeah, usually when that happens, I get a little concerned because the Saints must be leaking shit because even last year, like Fuaga was mocked to the Saints nonstop and that ended up being the pick. So, and Trevor Penning, 2 years before that was mocked to the Saints nonstop and that ended up being one of their picks. So we'll see. If we get into March and that ends up still being the projection for the Saints, then I think someone probably knows something, Hakeem says Rattler will perform better if he has an entire healthy O-line and a healthy wide receiver core to truly and fairly evaluate him. I think the idea is go with him and let him determine if we need to go QB in 2026. If that is what Kellen Moore prefers to do, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I think in theory it makes sense, but it all comes down to the coach. But I do think in theory it makes a lot of sense. Saints media have already stated that Alvin will love Kellen Moore's intelligence of the game. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? It makes sense. Donald says need to trade for a quarterback if one slips a little. We'll see. We'll see how the board shakes out. PB97 says, when do you expect the hire? Probably, in my opinion, I'd say the next 2 days. Next 2-3 days. I'll get done this week. I really do believe that. And I think just look at the timelines. If you want to go pretty much same team. Eagles 2 years ago, they lose the Super Bowl to the Chiefs. Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon, OC and DC for the Eagles that season. They had head coaching interviews. They were prime candidates for the Colts and Cardinals, respectively. They got hired 2 days after they lost the Super Bowl. So I believe Kellen Moore at some point this week, next 2-3 days, I believe will get done. Donald says Sanders/Ward have to be better prospects than Jalen Hurts. Ward definitely. I think Ward's definitely a better prospect than Hurts. Shador technically in terms of ranking. I just think Shador to me is, I don't think he's going to be that game-changing quarterback. I think he's going to be a very good distributor of the football, kind of like a Jared Goff. If you have everything around him, it's going to work and it's going to be fluid because Shador is really good at kind of being the point guard of an offense. But I don't think if people think he's going to come in and be the next, Jaden Daniels or, rookie year CJ Stroud, I don't see it personally, but I'll be rooting for him. I've talked to Shador before. He's a pretty cool dude. I'll be rooting for him, but I'm just, I'm not convinced that he's going to be a superstar. Jay's Galaxy says, I don't want to draft a crappy QB in the first. If it is a QB within the first or second round, it has to be a pivotal player. Markello says, pretend Staley isn't an option. Who could Moore pursue that is in Fangio's tree as DC? I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think that that's who they would end up, where he would end up going. I think, I got to pull it up, but I think what happened before is, who the hell was it? I saw a report the other day. Buccaneers outside linebackers coach George Edwards. That was the one. So they said Kellen Moore was looking at Staley and George Edwards at DC. So I think that's probably who you're looking at. I think if he was going to pluck someone from Vic Fangio's coaching tree / Eagles staff right now, I think that would have came out already. But that's kind of where I'm at. PB97 says, what is the source that Moore is going to be hired? I'm scared Moore will still stay. Okay, so I said this at the top of the show, but this was about 50 minutes ago, so I'll repeat it again just in case you guys weren't in here for that time. After the Eagles won the Super Bowl, their owner, Jeffrey Lurie, was asked if he expects to lose Kellen Moore. This is what he said. I do. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wish him the very best with New Orleans. Literally what the owner has said. So I think the Eagles know he's gone. I think he's out of there. And I think it's okay. I think, look, you just won the Super Bowl. I think when you win the Super Bowl, there is less pressure to stay and you can go leave. So I think that's going to happen. You see Nick Sirianni say, stay with us, Kellen. What do you think of that? I think he's just doing his job, trying to keep your coaching staff intact as he should, because he assembled a really good staff for the season, clearly, with bringing in Kellen Moore and bringing in Fangio. So shout out to him. And, I think Nick Sirianni did a really good job of kind of, debunking a couple of narratives, including myself. I was a Nick Sirianni skeptic, and I won't anymore, man. He did a great job this year. So shout out to what he built in Philly. But as for Kellen Moore, I believe he's coming to New Orleans. I'm not really worried about that. Xavier says Carr's got to be on his way out. He was the only Saint who wasn't there, current or past. I think Carr, look at his social media activity too. I mean, he posted, that kind of breakdown of him. What was it? His highlights or something on Instagram. I don't know. I think he's out of there. I think he's out of New Orleans personally. What's up, my friend? You remember a few weeks ago I asked you about Hendon Hooker? Well, article has come out, said the Lions expect to part ways with him. Hooker wants to start. We could get him and keep all the picks. I'm not knocking, the creativity to go out of the box, Hendon Hooker. I just why would Hendon Hooker be a successful option for the Saints, though? That's my question. That is my question, to ask, because I loved Hendon Hooker at Tennessee, but I just don't know what's the ceiling for him. That said, look, if there's a quarterback that's not going to cost anything, it's worth a try. But I also think they have a quarterback already in Rattler who, granted, I'm pumping the brakes on what he could be. That doesn't cost you anything to begin with. So that's just kind of where I'm at with that. But I loved Hendon Hooker as a college player for sure. Donald says, do we sign Zach Ball on big money? No, I don't believe so. I would say the team to look out there for maybe New England. They got a lot of money to spend. Mike Vrabel loves his linebackers. I would not rule that out as a spot. Philly's going to have to make some tough decisions. I'd imagine they want to keep Zach Ball, and they'll do whatever they can to keep him. But the price of winning is eventually you lose some guys. Rumor mill states Kellen is considering his brother. Will he come? Also, what position? I guess I must have missed that going on. But, for Kirby, I think, what's he at right now? Current position. Is he offensive coordinator, I believe? Yeah, so offensive coordinator for Missouri. Maybe quarterback's coach. Maybe quarterback's coach if you were to bring him along. I think that's probably what you're looking at. So, I really can't say for certain. I think, Nussmeier's been a guy that's been linked heavily to the Saints. Staley, George Edwards, that's probably been it. But, it doesn't hurt to add more young offensive minds to this staff. Do you think Moore can win? I'm guessing you're going Super Bowl. I don't know. It's too early to say. As a head coach, I don't know. I think technically every coach will have a chance, especially at this stage when they're unproven. I know as a play caller, he clearly can. He just did a great job on Sunday. What do you think about Carr not being in any Super Bowl media? I think it's a pretty bad display. And it's not me trying to be anti-Derek Carr, so please don't take it this way, guys. If you are the starting quarterback of the host city's team, I think you got to go out there and represent. And I think a lot of guys did. Cam Jordan, great, represented. Drew Brees in New Orleans all week. Reggie Bush in New Orleans all week. DeMario Davis in New Orleans all week. Like, Derek Carr, it's like the season ended, and this guy was like, all right, I'm going back to Fresno, and I'm getting the fuck out of here. And I get it, but doesn't mean I have to like it. So, was not a fan of that. What draft pick could we get with Carr if we trade him? If they trade him, which would be ideal for them, that'd be the best possible scenario. Probably the 4th, 5th round pick. I do believe Derek Carr is going to start next year in the NFL. I just don't know who he'll be with. Who do you think Kellen will get as DC? I'm going to stick with Brandon Staley. I believe that's going to be his pick, but we'll see what happens. But that'll probably be my pick. I believe that he'll probably go with Brandon Staley. But we'll see what happens. Hire has not been yet official or finalized, I should say. But Kellen Moore, he's coming to the Saints. Eagles owner Jeffrey Lurie has already hinted at that. I thought Kellen called a masterful Super Bowl. Was great in the NFC Championship game. The stock and the PR of Kellen Moore has never been higher than it is right now. And for a Saints team that on and off the field has taken their lumps the last couple of months, man, they can use a win. And I think Kellen Moore, at least the hiring from now, can be a win for this team. And when the hire goes down, we will have our live show. We will talk about it, break it down, and then we'll get into this roster and see who stays, who goes. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Saints. I still think this team is a long way to go before they're into that contender conversation again. But Kellen Moore would be a nice start to getting the Saints, feeling optimistic and this fan base being re-engaged with this team, because boy knows we need that, man. We need that. Last couple of months kind of been deflated, dejected. Be nice to have Kellen Moore install some life into this Saints team. So without further ado, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in, leaving your comments, your thoughts, super chats, all that. You guys were excellent on this Monday morning. I wish you guys all the very best for the rest of this week. And we'll see when this Kellen Moore deal gets done. I believe we'll get finalized this week. I really do. I just feel it deep down. And we'll see what happens in terms of the contract structure and all that. But, I'm excited about the Kellen Moore era whenever it does begin. And I think the Saints are finally, for the first time in a couple of years, going to have a little bit of hope that we could cling on to. So, again, thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll be back here later this week with more content on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.